Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Greg Palast is the best-selling author of Armed Madhouse. He's also an investigative journalist for the BBC. Among others, his website is gregpalast.com. Greg, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hey, Max. Glad to be with you.
Greg, you are a former corporate fraud and racketeering investigator. The question I have, is there a RICO case to be made against the Wall Street banks, regulators, politicians, rating agencies, fund managers, etc.? Isn't this an example of racketeering, and shouldn't we go after them using RICO?
Absolutely. I was one of the first guys to apply RICO, the anti-racketeering laws, to corporate crime, big corporations. And absolutely, what you see among the banks is a conspiracy, and I don't say that in the nutcase form, but just, these guys do get together and coordinate how they can suck money out of your pocket. And then obviously a tremendous amount of damage to the economy. And it's perfect racketeering case. But who's going to bring it, Max?
Okay, so in other words,
they're going to bust themselves. Is the is the administration going to read its rights to itself, or how do we do that?
Right. So it's not a conspiracy theory. This is actually a conspiracy, and the conspiracy involves participants like the rating agencies, Moody's and S&P. It involves the investment banks. It involves the fund managers who are trading on this information, and all of these component parts. I see very frustrating. I watch congressional testimony. And first they introduce the CEOs of the what I call the financial terrorists on Wall Street. Then they interview the rating agencies and ask what went wrong. Then they interview some famous fund manager like John Paulson and ask him what went wrong. Well, how come they don't connect the dots and say that they're all corrupt? It's a massive conspiracy. It's racketeering is what it is. And they need to address it as such. Isn't there a mechanism within the U.S. government that could apply this racketeering law? You're saying it doesn't exist. There is nobody. They're all corrupt. There is nobody left. There's no untouchables left.
Well, we have a Securities Exchange Commission which was completely asleep at the switch. They couldn't even get a guy like Madoff who was fiddling $50 billion. This stuff is more sophisticated. They looked at Anthony Mazzillo, who's the only guy that they seem to have tagged at all, who ran the countrywide subprime mortgage gangster operation, which became part of Bank of America. But,
right.
It was really a unit of Bank of America effectively. And so why is Bank of America off the hook? When you have a conspiracy, it's usually with someone. Why is the co-conspirator not in the dock there?
Right.
We also have the rating agencies, as you said, which were paid by the banks to basically whitewash their balance sheets. You're looking at a guy. I guess this might take me down a few pegs in your estimation, but would you like to buy some of my Lehman bonds, Max? It was, by the way, it was AA+ rated. So yeah, I think I have a bone to pick with these guys, and it's not just bad judgment. Wait a minute.
You got sucked into this? You own some of these Lehman paper?
Well, because I got to tell you that Citibank, unfortunately, where I stupidly had my money instead of a community credit union, shame on me. They wouldn't let me trade in oil when oil was too high. I wanted to take it. I wanted to bid against oil. And they said, no, that's too dangerous. You need to put it in someplace safe. So they parked it for me temporarily in Lehman Brothers, and the rest is wallpaper.
All right, let's move on. You've also reported extensively on Vulture funds. These funds are now starting to target Western nations. We know they've been active outside of the West. We see that with Greece, for example. Can you explain to the audience what a Vulture fund does, what it will mean to have economic carcasses torn apart by one of these funds in Greece, Iceland, and the rest of these countries, including the U.S.?
Yeah, well, these are funds. These are operators who take advantage of economic chaos, mayhem. In fact, I just came back from Liberia, where I had done a report hunting down American vultures who had seized the debt of Liberia, some of it for nothing, some of it for 1 penny on the dollar, sued Liberia in the middle of a civil war when they had no government to respond, won tens of millions of dollars in default judgments, and now are basically sucking up the aid money meant for Liberia. Now, that's how they treat the third world. We're used to that. But I got to tell you, they are turning it now on on the U.S., they're turning it on Greece, they're turning it on other countries where basically financiers make money on the demise of economies instead of on the growth of economies. They're not investing in anything. What they're doing is they're seizing financial assets, and they are doing their level best to make sure that the countries collapse. They can then pick up the paper, they can pick up the bonds, the debts for next to nothing, and then they find ways. We found ways through bribery, through intimidation, blackmail, and hiring Henry Kissinger, which wraps it all up, hiring Henry Kissinger to then use political muscle to get paid out of the poorest nation's accounts, or in some cases they'll take seize aid money. You know, in the case of Greece, you've got a bunch of financiers who say, pay up at a tremendous price, or we take the economy down. You have to understand, these countries are paying you serious rates to borrow to stay alive. Well, you can't, it's just like Argentina, which is being forced to pay 16%. Well, if you pay 16% on your debts, you cannot possibly stay in business as a nation. And now they're playing the game with Greece. They're putting pressure on Greece. And that's just one example. But, you know, they do it within nations, too, whether it's on the auto parts industry in the United States, et cetera. You'll see vultures acting everywhere. One
Right.
vulture I've been dealing with, Elliott Associates, investigating for the BBC, made its money in the asbestos area by figuring out how to buy up asbestos companies, then getting the law changed so that these asbestos companies wouldn't have to pay the victims of asbestos, of lung cancer caused by asbestos, and therefore the company suddenly became very valuable. So these are people who made money off of not paying sick, dying people. This is a vulture. The difference is that at least, but you know, the difference between a vulture with feathers, a bird, and these vultures is that vultures with feathers at least wait for things to die. These guys are killers.
Right. So the key phrase there is they got the laws changed. Now, when I was working on Wall
Yes.
Street, many times what I was told from my management at the firms that I worked for is go ahead and break the laws because we can always change the laws. And this is the attitude that they had on Wall Street, is that if they broke the law, it wasn't that they were breaking the law, it's that the law needed to be changed. The law hadn't kept up with the brilliance down there at Goldman and J.P. Morgan. So that just go ahead and break the law, and then we'll use the money we're making by stealing all this money from Americans to buy congressmen, to buy politicians, to go change the law. So it's part of the no-lose situation.
Well, in fact, I ran a story about why do you think they took down Elliott Spitzer? They've always known that he couldn't keep his zipper up. Why did they take him down when they did? The answer is they literally got him the day he was announcing that he was filing a lawsuit on behalf of every state attorney general in the United States against the subprime mortgage lenders, Countrywide, Bank of America, Citibank, the whole crew. And he was filing a nationwide attack on this trillion-dollar business, saying the entire business was criminal, was illegal. And what they did was they busted Elliott Spitzer on, you know, they pulled out the file on him, and then they decriminalized usurious mortgage lending, predatory mortgage. It used to be called predatory lending. Predatory lending was like what loan sharks did. But when guys are making, like Anthony Mazzillo of Bank of America's Countrywide unit, earned over $500 million personally, $500 million personally through predatory mortgage practices. This stuff used to be illegal. You're right. You used to go to jail for this. You used to, you know, break rocks on a chain gang. Now you get $100 million bonuses.
Right. Anthony Mazzillo, of course, of Countrywide. And part of the way that this whole Ponzi scheme works is that they're bought by Bank of America, and then Bank of America, to hide a huge Ponzi scheme, subprime mortgages over at Merrill Lynch, ends up buying Merrill Lynch. And when they consolidate these balance sheets, they put hundreds of billions or trillions off the balance sheet, special purpose entity accounts. They don't include them in their balance sheet reporting whatsoever. They go to Congress. They ask for a $700 billion bailout, as Paulson did at the point of a gun at the end of 2008. They say we need this to bail out these companies, but they don't disclose that as part of their machinations, as part of the Ponzi scheme, as part of the racketeering and fraud, that they're holding back hundreds of billions more in debts. Now, a year and a half later, these same guys, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, they're coming back and saying, oh, we have another $300 billion in losses, another $400 billion in losses. We forgot to tell you about those. So they just keep basically holding the economy hostage. And when they, as you point out, Goldman, J.P. Morgan, Cantor Fitzgerald, they make money on Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers collapsing. They make money during, before, after, and now that they've run out of banks to terrorize, they're terrorizing countries like Greece. They're terrorizing countries like Iceland. And they're using the same techniques. They bring in the products, like the Goldman advising the Greek government to hide billions in debt. The Greek government collapses. They're making money on the way down. They're making money on the way up. They're making money during the transaction. So it's basically rackets all around, 360 degrees of fraud. And there's not a single entity in the United States, in any, the Fed, the Treasury, Capitol Hill, nowhere, that's standing up and doing one thing. Now, one of your most famous investigative pieces you did expose the theft of the U.S. election in the year 2000. Now, the question is, Americans respond en masse with vitriol and send in the troops outrage at the merest allegation of vote rigging in countries outside of the U.S. But when it happens in their own country, they don't seem to care.
Yeah, it's very weird. I mean, I'm the one who uncovered that during the 2000 election, Jeb Bush and Katherine Harris tagged black people as felons, criminals not allowed to vote, but their only crime was voting while black. That was the election. We had about 87,000, something like that, people excluded from voting who were allowed to vote. 2004, it was actually worse. It was actually worse. 2008 was the worst election yet. I did an investigation with civil rights attorney Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We estimated about 6 million people who were turned away from the polls who had the right to vote, or had their ballots disqualified, especially mail-in ballots. We got 25 million mail-in ballots. About 3 million of those were thrown in the garbage. You mail in your vote, it didn't get counted. Come on. And we decided, okay, I mean, when it happens in the Ukraine, we protest, we withdraw our ambassador. When it happens in Peru, we say count all the votes. Whatever happened to counting all the votes? This is not happening in the U.S. We're not facing the fact. People say, oh, Obama got elected, so the election wasn't stolen. 6 million people in 2008 didn't have their votes counted, guys. That's serious. I don't care who wins or loses. Why don't we count the votes? This is a big issue. We're getting distracted by things about computer voting, etc. The big issue is people being removed from the vote registries. No one is talking about that in America. I have to report that on BBC or Max Keiser. Thank you for letting me do that.
Well, Greg Palast, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Got to do it again.
We'll have to have you back again soon. Greg Palast, author of the now classic, Armed Madhouse. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. I want to thank my guests, Stacey Herbert and Greg Palast. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.